Hello! Today's fabulous. We are going to be in Matthew chapter 17. So get out your Bible. I'm in ESV and let's get into it. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, Then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? He answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things, but I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. And when they came to the crowd, a man came up to him and kneeling before him said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures and he suffers terribly. For often he falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him. And Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? He said to them, Because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. As they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day. And they were greatly distressed. When they came to Capernaum, the tax collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, Does your teacher not pay the tax? He said, Yes. And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, What do you think, Simon? From whom do kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others? And when he said, From others, Jesus said to him, Then the sons are free. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself. All right, that is chapter 17. So now we're going to start verse 1, dissect it just as we usually do. So, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. So, this is talking about after 6 days in, I still did not remember to check how you say it, Caesarea Philippi. Okay, I don't know. After 6 days there, Jesus takes his inner circle, Peter, John, and James, and they go up. It says a high mountain. Now, this high mountain, according to the theologians and all those people that have studied Bible history, they believe it's Mount Hermon, which I forgot to check where that's at on my map, but you can Google it. So Mount Hermon is what they believe, or is where they believe this transfiguration took place. Okay, Verse 2, and he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Now the word transfigured in Greek, it's, I don't know how to say this, metamorpho, I don't know. And obviously this is where we get the word metamorphosis, or is that the word? That is the word. I'm blanking. That's embarrassing. But when something, yeah, it is metamorphosis. Well, that's where we get that word, obviously. Durr. But to change it, which means to change into another form, which is he is giving a real time, real life reminder to Peter, James, and John of his divinity. He literally, Jesus is the form of God in a man. And so you have this literal, the physical form of of being a man, and the changing of that to become not necessarily different, but it is different because he's shining. You get what I'm saying? Like, he's literally showing this other form of God in that moment through his shining face and whatnot. Okay, I worded that terribly, and I did not do Jesus justice, but you know what? He's God. I cannot do him justice anyways, because I'm an imperfect being. So, what do you expect from me, okay? Verse 3, and behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Now, you might be thinking, why Moses and Elijah? Moses, you might think, okay, that makes sense because Moses wrote the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, which gives us the law. And obviously we have the whole creation story, all that good, important stuff. So, Moses, as I just said, he wrote the law. Moses, in this sense, is kind of representing the law. And then you have Elijah, who was a prophet. And so now we have Elijah, who's representing the prophets, okay? So you have the law and the prophets represented by Moses and Elijah, and the law and the prophets all testify and witness to the coming of the Messiah. And so now you have the actual Messiah, Jesus. And so it's kind of a full circle moment of Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets being fulfilled in Jesus. Also, what's interesting is you have Moses, who was not allowed to see God's face, which we see in Exodus. Let me flip there. Oh my gosh, this is taking too long. Okay, Exodus 33, verses 17 through 23, which says, wait. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay. And the Lord said to Moses, this very thing that you have spoken I will do, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. Moses said, please show me your glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. So you have Moses, who is not able to see the glory of God, or else he will die. And then in Numbers, oh gosh, I pulled way too far. In Numbers chapter 20, verse 7 through 12, it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them, and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. So in this, you're probably thinking, why did you just read that? Okay, so Moses in this instance, this is while he is with the Israelites. They are out of Egypt, traveling to take back the promised land. And so there's no water. The people are complaining. Moses goes to God. God says to him that he is to tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. And then Moses disobeys and he strikes the rock twice. As a result for that, God says, I'm looking, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, I was totally looking in the wrong spot. I look really dumb now. Okay, if you continue in verse 12, it says, and the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. So, as a result of his disobedience, Moses is told that he's not going to enter the promised land. Okay, so we have Moses who's not allowed to see the glory of God in his human body, or he won't survive. And then as punishment, he's not allowed to enter the promised land. Well, it says he's not going to lead this assembly into the promised land. Okay? Well, now, fast forward thousands, hundreds of years, you get to Matthew chapter 17, and they are out on Mount Hermon in the promised land. And it says in verse 3, and behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Moses is now talking to Jesus, who is God. And then he's also literally in the promised land. And not only is he talking to God, but it says Moses, when he asks to see God, he says to see his glory. And then you have Jesus, who's just had the transfiguration, and it says that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And as that's happening, this transfiguration, his glory, okay, he's talking to Moses. Moses is now getting to see the glory of God. What a beautiful fulfillment. And you might be thinking, well, it doesn't say technically that that's the glory of God when Jesus is going through his transfiguration. Well, if we flip to 2 Peter, chapter 1, verse 16 through 18, it says, for we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, and the voice was borne to him by the majestic glory, this is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased, we ourselves heard this very voice borne from heaven, for we were with him on the holy mountain. So the holy mountain. It says they're on a high mountain. He is talking about this specific moment, okay? And he's saying, he is referring to this transfiguration as the glory of God, Christ's glory, okay? So, just saying that this is a moment of just seeing this other side of Jesus, his divinity, and his glory. Okay? No argument there. Continuing on. Verse 4. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here. One for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Now, you might be thinking 3 tents like sleeping tents. And that Peter, in his very human way, is like, oh, you guys are all here. I'm going to build you 3 sleeping tents. And you can stay the night. Which, I mean, Peter is thinking in a human way. But it's not sleeping tents, the word that is used. The word for tent is, I believe, in Greek, skene. I might be wrong. But it means tabernacle or like a memorial. So he's trying, it's not a tent as in a sleeping tent where you reside. It's a tent like that he was talking about, like a tabernacle for like a holy place is what he's saying. Got it? Okay. Verse 5, he was still speaking when behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. First we have this, it says a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came from the cloud. This should remind you, if you're familiar with Exodus, of God and his presence being represented through the column of the cloud. Not like a tornado, but like kind of, if that makes sense. In Exodus, if you're not familiar, when Moses and the Israelites are escaping Egypt to start making their way back to the promised land, God is with them, and at night he's a pillar of fire, and during the day he's a pillar of clouds. And so now you have, during the day, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, and so, again, representing God's presence, just as they would have been familiar with. They've all their lives heard these stories from the Torah and the prophets, and so when they see this large cloud, I'm sure this would have been running through their head that, oh, that's a representation of God. Like, God is with us right now. And then the second half of verse 5, it says, This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Obviously, this should remind you of Jesus' baptism, which takes place in Matthew chapter 3. Let me flip there. Chapter 3, verse 17. The heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming to rest on him. And behold, a voice from heaven said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. So now we have the reiteration from God of Jesus' identity as the Messiah, that this is his Son. And then we added a little something. God added a little command, which is very clear. It says, listen to him. Nothing confusing about that. Just listen to Jesus. Point blank, period. All right. Verse 6, when the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one of the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. So he's telling his inner circle, keep this secret for now. There will be a time when you can tell it, but it's not yet. Verse 10. And the disciples asked him, "Then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" Which we talked about, that Elijah is like the forerunner to the Messiah. We talked about this earlier in the Gospel of Matthew, in the second or third chapter, because we're talking about John the Baptist. And this idea existed because of Malachi, the prophet. So I'm going to flip there, which is, oh gosh, not that far. Okay, I messed that up. I'm doing so good. Okay. Malachi chapter 4 verses 5 through 7 or 5 through 6. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord. Before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and the hearts of children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. Okay, and then we have John the Baptist, who it says God gave him the spirit of Elijah, and then there's a bunch of parallels between John the Baptist and Elijah, such as wearing camel's hair and wearing a belt of leather and all these other things. So we are given a clear sign that it's John the Baptist. And so they're asking him, oh, well, why did they say that Elijah must first come? Because they're confused because they just literally saw Elijah on the mountain. They're like, Elijah hasn't come before now. And then, verse 11, Jesus, answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. So I tell you that Elijah has already come. And they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. Okay, so the spirit of Elijah did already come, and John the Baptist already took place. So they're right. Oh, this thing is a precursor to the coming of the Messiah, but it's already happened, is what he's saying. You're so right to look at that. That is important. It's just already happened. You don't have to wait for it anymore because it's done. And then, notice it says, so also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. So again, Jesus is very clear in telling the disciples that his death is coming. We get it very explicitly in chapter 16 when it says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And then, obviously, in chapter 17, it says that so also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands, just like John the Baptist. John the Baptist, who was literally beheaded. So, continuing on. Let me make sure I'm caught up with my notes. Okay, verse 14. And when they came to the crowd, a man came up to him, kneeling before him, said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures and suffers terribly. So the man calls Jesus Lord, okay? Very important, because obviously, Lord, sometimes during that time, in my understanding, they would use Lord just as like a title of like, if we were just referring to someone of status who's over you. But they're in Galilee, so probably a Jewish man. And so for him to refer to Jesus as Lord, big statement. And he comes to him saying, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures and he suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples and they could not heal him. So he believes that Jesus is fully capable of healing his son. He does say he tried the disciples because the disciples have previously done works, but for some reason it didn't work. He's like, okay, well, if the disciples can't, Jesus definitely can. So I'm going to go straight to the source. Okay? Let me flip my notes. Okay. Verse 16, and I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him. And Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me. The term, O faithless and twisted generation, this will probably remind you of Jesus arguing with the Pharisees who ask for a sign. Where is it? Where is it? I'm looking, but I did not write it down. In chapter 16, verse 4, an evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign. And then now he says, "O faithless and twisted generation." So clearly, Jesus had a lot of problems with that generation. Good thing that's not us, right? Right? Anyways. O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me. And then in verse 18, verse 17, Jesus is clearly saying, I'm not going to be here forever for me to, justify my case or not like justify my case, sorry, that's not the right words. Let me think for a second how to say this. Actually, I think this will make more sense if I just read on and then say what I'm trying to say. Verse 18, and Jesus rebuked the demons, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? He said to them, Because of your little faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. And so he says, O faithless and twisted generation. Then when the disciples ask why they couldn't do it, he says, O you of little faith. They have some faith, but again, little faith is the problem. Is that they're like, okay, I believe like Jesus is the Messiah. I believe God is real, that Jesus is the Son of God. But do they believe that Jesus can work through them? That God can work through them? Because you have the man with his son who fully believes that Jesus and the disciples could heal his son. That's why he went to the disciples first before he went to Jesus. He's just like, one of you guys, you're capable of healing them. But it's the disciples who did not believe that God was capable of working through them to heal the son. And so this is a problem not with just their faith, but with their perception of God. That God is not a big enough God to be able to use an imperfect vessel. That our God is a big God, okay? You do not have to be perfect for God to use you. And if that's the case, then no one would ever be used by God. That no good could ever be done because we're imperfect and we will always be that way. So, that to you should be encouraging, because whether you just are imperfect. Everyone's imperfect. So despite being imperfect, God can still use you and bring good through you and work in your life because he's that powerful. But you have to have faith that he is capable, because he is capable. And so Jesus now, he's like, oh, faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? He's not going to be here to remind us every time that you lose track, that you start to lose a little faith, that you start to doubt. He's talking to the disciples, I'm not going to be here right next to you to point it out. I'm not going to live side by side with you for the rest of your life. So, how many times do I have to tell you? Do I have to justify? Do I have to show you the evidence of who I am, of who God is, for you to truly believe that and to live like that? Okay. Also, in verse 20, when it says, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed. A mustard seed is extremely small. And so he's saying if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there. And it will move and nothing will be impossible for you. So faith goes a long way. A long, long way. So he says to them, "Oh, you of little faith." So just imagine how small their faith is. If he's saying, if you had faith like a mustard seed, which is already small, that you could do all these amazing things. So how much smaller must their faith be? Because they aren't doing those amazing things in that moment, at least. If that makes sense. I don't know. But whether that made sense or not, you're called to have a big faith. Okay? Little faith is a problem. Jesus does not say that in a sweet tone. He says, "Oh, you of little faith." It is convicting. Verse 22. As they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the disciples, "The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." And they were greatly distressed. So now we have a second time where Jesus is just explicitly saying, I'm going to be taken, I'm going to be killed, and I will be resurrected on the third day. Okay? Which, it says that the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. Delivered. That's an important word. That he's not just going to be taken, that someone's going to hand him over. So this is, I believe, the first instance where Jesus is saying that someone is going to betray him, which is going to be the cause of his death. Okay? So, yeah. Verse 24. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" He said, "Yes." And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke. Well, actually, before I continue reading on. Okay, so the 2 drachma tax. Where does this come from? What is it? I'm about to tell you. Do not worry. If you flip to Exodus chapter 30. Okay, chapter 30, verses 11 through 16. The Lord said to Moses, "When you take the census of the people of Israel, then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord when you number them, that there be no plague among them when you number them. Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary." The shekel is 20 gerahs. That's in parentheses. "Half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered in the census from 20 years old and upward shall give the Lord's offering. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than the half shekel when you give the Lord's offering to make atonement for your lives. You shall take the atonement money from the people of Israel and shall give it to the service of the tent of meeting, that it may bring the people of Israel to remembrance before the Lord, so as to make atonement for your lives." So this tax is only for the Israelites. It is done by the priests, by the Levitical priests, the Israelites, only for the Jews. This is not a Roman imposed tax, okay? And then it says to them that they're to give a shekel. But you're probably thinking, oh, well, in this it says 2 drachma. And let me explain. So a shekel is like what the Jews were using for money and whatnot. Well, during this time, they were under Roman rule. And so Romans were using, you would either have a denarius, or drachma. Okay, this is going to kind of get confusing. Romans the Roman Empire exists during Jesus' time. Before the Roman Empire, you had the Greek Empire. In the Greek Empire, their money was the Greek drachma. So now you have the Roman Empire that has taken over, and they have their money, the Roman denarius, denarii, whatever, but they took over, so they're still influenced by the previous empire that existed, and so the Greek drachma still exists. Now, one shekel, one Jewish shekel, is equal to 4 Greek drachmas. So, it says that in Exodus chapter 30, it says that each person, each one who is numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel. So if 1 shekel equals 4 drachma, then half a shekel equals 2 drachma, which is why it says it's a 2 drachma tax, because that's the equivalent of half a shekel that everyone is told to pay. Okay? So, also, well, I'll get into that in a second. I'm getting excited. I'm sorry for the sniffles. I'm almost done. I'm literally so close to the end. Okay, so the people that are collecting the tax for the temple will go up to Peter. Does your teacher not pay the tax? He said yes. When he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others?" And when he said, "From others," Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free." So now Jesus is saying, well, just like our Father, if the kings wouldn't tax their sons, then the King of Kings, God, would not tax his sons. Jesus is literally his son. So, and then Jesus, through faith in Jesus, you have forgiveness, you're grafted into the family, you become a son. Okay? So, if God wouldn't tax his sons or his daughters, but in this case his sons, because I think it was only the men that paid the tax, but I might be wrong. I might be wrong on that. Anyways, he's saying, oh, well, if kings don't tax their sons, then why do you think God would? And he says, then the sons are free. So now Jesus is actually saying that we're done with that part of the law. Okay? We're done. However, not to give offense to them, go to sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself. So, Jesus is saying that that the sons are free, no longer under the Old Testament law, but time and place to pick his battles. He's not going to mess with that right now. But he's telling Peter, by the way, though, you are done with this. Like, we don't have to do this anymore. We're doing it to keep the peace right now because we got other things to worry about. But this law is not holding up anymore. Also, it says, take that and give it to them for me and yourself. Jesus is talking about him and Peter, none of the other disciples. Well, why don't the other disciples? You have the 12 disciples and Jesus, that's 13. Guys, why are none of them, the other 11, paying? Well, in the law, it says everyone who is numbered in the census from 20 years old and upward shall give the Lord's offering. 20 years old and upward. So, if the other disciples didn't have to pay the tax, then we can assume that's because they were not 20 years old. Most of Jesus's disciples were very young. They were in their teenage years. It's believed that John was the youngest, and then the oldest was probably Peter, which makes sense in this case because he is the only disciple out of the 12 that is paying the tax. It also, earlier in Matthew, we know that Peter is married. He is the only disciple that we know of that is married because it says that Jesus healed his mother-in-law. And so it totally checks out. Everything adds up that Peter and Jesus. We know that Jesus is around 30 years old. It explicitly says that, I believe, in the gospel according to Luke. But yes, so most of the disciples, while they were following Jesus throughout his ministry, were in their teens. They weren't some old guys. They weren't, Jesus was the oldest one, and Jesus was, at this time, probably about 33. 33 is not old. But, it's crazy just to think that Jesus had a bunch of teenagers that were following him. Like, the value he had in teenagers, obviously. Today, if you were doing some crazy thing, chances are you don't have a bunch of teenagers that you're working with unless you're volunteering and literally you're doing like a school program. Like, teenagers aren't going, you can be working, but like most teenagers are in high school. They're not going around with this crazy ministry all over the Israel and doing miracles. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm yapping too much. Okay, well, that is the conclusion of this video. So, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And that the word sticks with you and changes your life for the better. Thanks. And if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.